So welcome to this special session workshop, which follows on very nicely from Anita McGann's presidential address. How many people heard Anita's address? Okay, very good. Gosh. Well, we certainly found it inspirational. I guess that's as much as I can say, because I can't remember everything that was said. But she certainly started out by critiquing or criticizing the travel ban, and then built on from there, and very much setting out challenges for the Academy and saying it's not the Academy of Business, it's the Academy of Management, and what management can do for organizations that aren't just corporations and so on, but many other different types of organizations. So it'll be coming out, of course, in AMR, and maybe the video will be posted online also. So the Borders of Nations and Scholarship are the interface of political and intellectual questions, and of course this came out of all that was happening in the earlier part of this year. And within the CMS division, how many people here are members of the CMS division? Okay, well, I guess most people. And welcome everybody who isn't. Maybe you might think of joining our division also. So the discussions that we're having on the listserv and the survey that we also did with members, and then of course Anita and the Academy were inviting proposals for special sessions, so we submitted, and I think it was one of 4 or 6 that were selected, so we were delighted with that. In terms of the motivation, so the US government's executive order on travel and immigration brought the interface between political and intellectual questions into particularly sharp relief. So the executive order has had deeply personal effects, leaving many AOM members either excluded from the US or effectively barred by the perceived xenophobic implications of broader US government policies that the EO represents. And while attempts at arbitrary border control are clearly racist, the outrage of many management scholars may also be linked to the wider questions the executive order raised at the interface of the political and the intellectual. So this is the motivation behind the special session. At this point, it might be helpful if we do a little bit of introductions. And perhaps what we'd like to do is, rather than everybody spread out and so that we have enough people at each table, if you could form tables in around about here with about 6 people at each table. So if we could do that now, we'll do a bit of moving around.
Yeah, if the people on the periphery probably move in.
Yeah. And if you could move more forward, that'd be great.
Best if, shall I go and say which tables they are?
Sure.
Otherwise, so it'd be good if the front.
Yes, please.
If you guys want to stay as a group, that's perfectly fine. Yeah?
Just want reasonably equal numbers.
Yeah.
So it's,
So no, that's good. So I guess within your groups, if you just introduce yourselves, like, hi, I'm, and then what motivated you to attend this session and what do you hope to get from the session? So if we do that now for a few minutes, that'd be good. So
maybe we should say who we are.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm Paul Donnelly. I'm myself and Banu are currently co-chair elects. We'll be, I guess, chairs from this afternoon of the division. And I guess what motivated me to attend the session, well, I guess one of the organisers, but certainly all that was happening in the earlier part of the year, and certainly the amount of time and so on that we engaged with membership and also engaged with Anita McGann via Skype. She was very, very generous with her time. And what do I hope to get out of this session? I guess lots of takeaways that will then perhaps lead to something further, but I don't know what that is as yet.
Thank you. So welcome. I'm also with Paul, incoming chair of the CMS division. And I think for me it was, the motivation was really thinking about the future of CMS and what we could do as scholars and activists and what that might look like, because Trump isn't going to go away and neither are those conversations and kinds of people that we're dealt to, deal with on a daily basis in organizational settings and otherwise. So trying to get a sense of what I could do at my organization very concretely, and then intellectually what my writing might need to look like.
I'm Mark Learmonth. I'm the program chair at the moment, and what struck me at the time of the travel ban was announced was the real anger among lots of people in the academy, particularly in the CMS group. expressed on social media and all sorts of places. And also a sense of not being able to do anything about it because, the Academy at that time were clear that they weren't going to make any kind of political statement. And that just exacerbated the problem as far as I think most of us were concerned. But I was delighted that we were invited to do this because I think, those of you who were at the President's address, clearly she feels very strongly about the whole situation, which I think is a great thing for her to say. Opening her speech by condemning the travel ban, I think that's a really brave thing to do, I guess. Anyway, so I'm fascinated to know what we can do in concrete terms, to basically oppose all the political stuff that's going on at the moment, not just in the States, but I suppose it's exemplified by the States, but across many nations. Okay.
So if you'd like to do the introductions amongst yourselves and your groups, maybe we could start that way.
Yeah.
So we're actually going to not do question 4 here, but we're going to invite you to our business meeting, and then past the business meeting, we're having an activist sort of think-in, and that's where we're going to address this question. So for now, what we're going to do is sort of move into sort of the takeaways. So we're probably going to go to each table and have the either the executive committee member or the person who's going to be speaking sort of give us their takeaways for question 1, and then we'll discuss that and then go to question 2, and then, time permitting, question 3. But we really want to get a sense of what you talked about and then think through some of the next steps that we can all engage in. So I'll start with Patrizia.
Yeah, to give everyone a chance, I will only pick out a couple of things that were said. Well, first of all, talking about this whole, going to question 1, I thought it would be up there, is about, can you put it up? Yep. I think that would be helpful. Yeah, it's up here, so people can see it. So how can outrage and moral indignation be used, be used as positive forces in scholarship? And one thing maybe to frame it is that, it's not okay to, we thought it's not okay to not have an opinion, or to not, just stand by and watch these things, because there will be a time when we will be held accountable of, you were seeing these things, you were watching these things, and what did you do? Were you just, keeping silent? And the question came up at our table whether the outrage that we feel is actually big enough, because it seems that the voices of those, let's say, who voted for Trump, the forgotten generations, that their outrage was so big that they kind of overpowered maybe the people who feel the outrage now about what is happening. So the question is, shouldn't there even be more outrage? Then we thought that universities as intellectual, let's say, institutions should still, or we assume, are more liberal than having those conservative force, but it's really a matter of how daring are we to speak up, because it's sometimes our family members, close friends, our students, and having those conversations about political differences can be very personal, potentially painful, and it's really this question of how do we go into that? Do we kind of take the step of having unpleasant conversations? But there's also some hope in the group saying that this is the golden era for democracy to awake, because we have taken it too long for granted. So there needs to be a shake-up. And as we will hear in the second question, this is not only true for the US, but for, many Western and other countries generally. Anything to add from?
If there's any comments, we can take them now. Otherwise, we'll go to the next question. Do you prefer the
Okay. Thank you. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, so my voice is a bit croaky, but hopefully I can do justice to what my group, or our group, came up with. We sort of came up with 3 points that I think are interrelated in response to this question. First, we thought that, and we were encouraged that in many of our classrooms, this indignation and outrage is reflected by many of our students as well. And so we thought we could really try and use that energy in our classrooms to give that energy a voice and to give that an opportunity to become part of what we teach. And so the topics that we teach can reflect people's, or particularly young people's, indignation and confusion about what is happening. And we thought that we had a role to play in using that and channeling that through some of our traditional critical frameworks, to get people to talk about these issues and then to present frameworks that could help people understand and unpack, and also presenting evidence to people in a way that for our young students is easy to digest and easy for them to reflect on, and actually that helps them see or take that enthusiasm and feed it into their studies and their knowledge. So that was the first point. Second, we thought there was an opportunity for us to look at other worlds. We can get very focused on the present and the indignation that we might feel about the present, but there was an opportunity for us in our scholarship and our teaching, both to look at the future and to imagine how the future could be different, to give people some goals, if you like, as to how we could not get stuck in this groove, but actually try and encourage people to be abductive and to think about, well, how would we like it to be, and how should it be? What the young people that we teach and the young scholars that we talk to, how can they make it different? How can they change it? And we thought that was important to look to the future, but also we thought it was important to look back to the past, when things were different, and maybe the way that we've interpreted the past, to encourage people to realize that this nation and many other nations are built around the sort of things that are now being prevented, not only by the travel ban, but by many of the other policies that I think those of us gathered here today are disturbed by. So that was the second thing, to look otherwise, both towards the future, but also again at the past, to see if we can learn and find other ways, or be inspired by other ways of looking at things. And then our third point was that I think we do need to engage as scholars in some self-reflection. I mean, what does it mean to be a critical scholar today? We now, sometimes when there's not something to be so critical about, it's easy to be very internally focused on our methodologies and our theories. But now, there are real issues that we have a role to play. And so I think we need to reflect on that. And also we need to reflect on our institutions as well. Business schools, schools of management, I mean, how are they helping and how are they hindering us, trying to sort of to educate and encourage younger people in particular to help find a way, a different way beyond where we seem to have got ourselves right now. So those were our 3 points. Thanks.
Ours was a small group, but we have quite a few things to say here because I am unable to put them into neat boxes. Okay, so one of the first things was in our teacher roles, we felt it was important to get them to look at alternate narratives from all kinds of things. It's not simply about capitalism and other, including different, for instance, we had this person from Israel who talks about how do you get people to look at their local conflicts differently, or deal with the political views that get expressed in the classroom, and rather than silencing them, helping them engage with each other. And that was an important thing. And secondly, we also realized that our values are straight away reflected in the choices we make in terms of our teaching courses, the way we develop them, or the research questions, the sites we choose, and so on and so forth. So being much more conscious about that, about the issues that concern us, that's another thing. And then being always prepared in terms of equipping oneself so that one is able to use situations that come along or happen to make people more alert and ourselves more capable in engaging with issues of relevance for a better world. Those kinds of things. Finding also collaborators and creating spaces within our own institutions by engaging with colleagues, helping them also see the other narrative rather than say this is a different area, I specialize in this and go on. Instead of that, looking at that also as our engagement as a part of the scholarly enterprise, and bringing voices from outside, helping them be heard inside a classroom, taking classroom voices elsewhere. So raising the voices and where they can be heard, and helping people recognize that they are having these multiple identities within them and how to use that very effectively. So these are all the things that we talked about when we did question 1.
So a feature that I think characterised some of our discussions was to think about the CMS division, but also to think about other divisions within the Academy and our different experiences of working with the moral indignation around the travel ban. The point was made that some areas of the Academy dealt with those issues by saying that they weren't political. And then we had a discussion about the relationship between science and politics and the impossibility of separating those two things out. And also looking to other areas of professional practice. So the example was given of health professionals and how they have dealt with, in Australia, issues of immigration by taking direct action in ways that seek to protect individuals, children who are affected by immigration rules. And then trying to think about whether we as a professional community can take direct action. And in so doing, translate our personal moral outrage into something that's more collective and constructive. And then, in that regard, we thought that actually it's important to acknowledge that what is constituted as political is political. And that's taking it back another step. And so if the bureaucracy of AOM deals with political issues by referring them to a committee that then deals with political issues, maybe an act of resistance is to refer every item on the Academy programme to them for consideration as a political issue.
So I'm going to deal very briefly towards the back there with question 1 and then talk about question 2 as a way of sort of moving us along. And we had a substantive conversation about separation of personal and professional in our working lives. And we talked in particular about the possibility of making that separation, but the tension in looking to our professional association for action and for response to what's happened in the US in the last 9 months. And we also had a substantial conversation about energy and fatigue and where the energy comes from to maintain this kind of activity, which we think is a significant issue. And personal cost also, which I think we've seen in a number of individual colleagues over the last 12 months. In terms of the relative silence about other regimes, excuse me, speaking as an employee of the University of Birmingham, which is currently setting up a satellite campus in Dubai, unfortunately, we had a very interesting conversation about this, and a sense of Disappointment. Why has there been a particularly strong response to what's happened in the US in contrast to other much more directly repressive regimes around the world, with which our universities deal directly? And a sense of dismay. And we decided that we identify with the US, we like the US. That's an affective response as much as a political, an ideological, or an intellectual or a professional response. And in relation to the second question, we also talked a great deal about the possibility of the development of professional standards, which ran through all three questions, and the complete lack, as far as we're aware, of any professional standards for our profession, certainly explicit professional standards. So that was how we worked through question 1 and 2. Anything to add? Please do. No? Good. Okay. Thank you.
So for question 2, we were a bit less disciplined in following what the question asked us to do, but I think we had a great discussion still, because we were at a table where we had people from the US, someone living very close to the border of Mexico, China, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and the UK. So what that brought about was, or we figured out that yes, even though there is a lot of outrage about what is going on in the US, there's quite a big awareness also, at least in that little group, of what is going on in other parts of the world, and also some feeling very distressed or disturbed about these things. It starts from like the Brexit, from what is going on in Turkey, from a one-party system in China, also how the Netherlands, they just, came off the cliff of this right-wing shift that goes across Europe, and is really shocking for many of us. So we kind of kept actually indulging a bit about the things that we see are not just, and I think it's very important to kind of keep this broader focus on what is going on. We still looked at why this focus on the US, and I think the disappointment with the US was probably the biggest, because for some reason they came to be associated with the rule of the law and with democracy, or really representatives of democracy, even if that came from Greece in the first place. So they had at some point some kind of moral, not superiority, but some place to look for, for guidance or advice, and this has turned just into the opposite. So maybe that was the big shock or outrage about the US. And one thing maybe on a meta level was we realized, but it's very important for whatever's happening in all those countries that are being radicalized and more towards the right wing, that opposition is something which is very crucial also to democracy. So you cannot have just everyone thinks alike, and once there's someone who thinks differently, we break up conversation, because then it becomes radical. So one thing we thought is very important is to stop this divide of either you on that camp or on that camp, but to keep the conversation, as difficult as it is, and to keep opposition, to embrace opposition in a very, a civilized way, so that you stop the radicalization on the sides.
Yeah, I think we were a little bit less disciplined as well. There was so much energy from answering the first question that kind of spilled into our discussion on the second question. But I think that was okay. And actually, many of the things that Scott and Patricia have said already, particularly this notion of disappointment, I think, particularly for those who maybe are not from the United States, but who have looked to the US for inspiration, perhaps. I think this is a little bit disillusioning. So anyway, I think the first point was that we had to put our hands up as part of the thing we said in answer to the first question, this notion of self-reflection. We had to reflect and say, well, look, we didn't really speak out about Turkey in the way that we could have and should have, and there are many other things, that the border wall didn't energize in the same way. So we have to wear that and say, well, yeah, there was a failure, that we maybe weren't as activist about those things. So we felt, so we took that on board. Being academics, though, does give you an opportunity to feel better by intellectualizing why it was that we didn't respond. So we then went into the reasons why that the travel ban created this kind of tipping point or lit the fire that led to a lot of other more positive responses to these things. And I think the first was that it was kind of like being invited to a familiar house. I mean, the Academy of Management is something that we, for people from outside of the United States, have increasingly felt welcome at over the last 10 to 15 years. 15 years ago, I probably didn't feel as welcome at the Academy coming from outside America. Certainly is what I've done in the last few years. So it was like you were being invited back to a familiar house, that one that you'd felt really welcome at, but this time you felt you were being invited, but not everybody can come, just some of you. And you can, from a personal point of view, you can reflect on that in your own life. Imagine if you were invited around to a familiar friend's house, but that familiar friend was saying, it's okay if maybe you come, but these other people, we're not going to invite them anymore. And I think that really made us feel that we had to, this wasn't right, that there was a sense of indignation that something had to be done. And so I think that did help light the fire. The fact that it was directed not so much at a nation state, many of these other things maybe were within a nation or about one nation to another, but it seemed, well, firstly poorly directed, but then also directed towards a global religion. So it wasn't just a nation that was being singled out, but a whole religion which is present in every country in which we live. Seemed, I think, to some people, all of us felt that this a heightened sense of indignation, and then I think that it gathered momentum with the Academy's response, and I think that certainly other people on the executive who were involved in the CMS executive, will tell you that there was indignation before the Academy issued its position, but after the Academy issued its position, it really took off. So I think those were some of the reasons. We can't escape the fact that we should really reflect that we should have reacted to some of the other things, but these are some of the reasons why perhaps the travel ban became sort of this point at which we all kind of felt something needed to be done.
So, on this question, a couple of things that we identified was the sheer unexpectedness of the whole thing, and the immediacy with which it happened struck a lot of people, and why we were not probably responding to many of the other things is the usual politics and science are different, politics and research is different kind of story, and that this is an American AOM. And all of us are trying to come here and do our own thing, and suddenly some can't come. That is an issue. And besides that, this is the biggest academy of management scholars, so the influence that this holds is much higher. And not seeing the academy do something about it was equally annoying. And more importantly, why the US thing has provoked, all said and done, US it's almost like the only center, I hate to say it, but I'm saying it, with the money, the resources, and all kinds of stuff. So whatever it does or does not do ends up having many more ramifications all over the world as compared to many other countries. So it becomes much more easier to respond to issues when they are occurring in the US rather than when they are occurring elsewhere. And because it's the US, it grabs everybody's headlines as well. in all countries. So.
Scott, would you mind doing the full question, then Emma will do what you did and transition to the next question?
It's already done. It doesn't matter.
Oh, well, it doesn't matter. So, yes, of course, yeah. Sorry.
Would you like to? I'll be very brief. So I've kind of described how we dealt with the second question, which Emma's just going to describe for her group, but before she does that, we looked at the third question, distinctive contributions that management scholars can bring to this issue. It was very, very straightforward. We choose who we research, we choose what we research. To a large extent, we choose what we teach. And in many of the higher education institutions that we teach in, we teach the largest groups on campus. So we reach more ears and brains and sets of values than any other educators on campus. Those are the distinctive contributions that we make. And we spent a lot of time under that question talking about values, which has been relatively silent within the Academy of Management in the last 6 months. That was us. Thank you.
So just going back a bit to question 2 then, and thinking about, I suppose what we would add is that the point was made that there isn't a silence around reprehensible actions in other countries, and examples were given of scholars who are working very actively in their contexts, but that those stories aren't being told within the AOM. So it's about where that silencing happens and the reasons for it. And the point which has already been made about the US-centric nature of AOM was made. And then we talked about whether there were things that could be done to make it less US-centric. And the issue of the small conferences initiative, which some divisions are quite proactively engaged in, was suggested as a possibility of one way of making it less US-centric. And yet within the CMS division, there are a number of concerns about the potential colonizing nature of that practice and the way in which it could supplant very healthy professional associations in other parts of the world. So there are tensions here, and I think we felt that there was a sort of a slight circularity to the position that we're in. We need to find ways to break out of that. If being US-centric is a problem, then what needs to happen in order to be less US-centric? And then finally, question 3. In terms of what we can do, the point was made that not everyone knows how to be an activist, and that potentially the CMS division could work with other divisions to talk to them and work with them in collaborative ways to think about what we could do as scholars in relation to this agenda we're talking about today. And I think that would be a really good thing. I'm coming to the end of my time within the CMS division, and sometimes CMS has, I think, felt for me like a place where we seek safety by gathering together and feeling somewhat embattled within the academy. There are reasons for that. And I think that one of the things that we need to do is to go out to other divisions and try to work with them where we find those voices of solidarity. But I would also urge those other divisions to work with us, because on occasions I have knocked on the door and there hasn't been a reply. So if we're going to pursue this agenda, then I think it would be really great to do more of that.
Okay, just wrapping up with our last question, and I think a lot of it has already been said, so I try not to repeat too much. First of all, we realized it's very easy to be idealistic about something and to want something to change, but to actually do something, to take action, is then sometimes a much bigger step than we acknowledge. yes, one thing was in research, like choosing sensitive topics that we might not feel are so appropriate, just going for it, taking the courage. And I've luckily seen some of this happening also within the CMS community, people looking at voluntary work, refugee work that is going on. And I think this shouldn't only be, even though it's like timely topics, I think, there's also this broader dimension of looking at also historically, how did we end up in those times where we are at, and where do we need to be heading? Then also what Scott says, not only in research, but also in teaching. And then we had someone from the group also going back to John Dewey, who said that the role of higher education is to implement the seed of democracy into a student's heart. And while there were maybe times when, education was not political, we live in times where it's very difficult to not take a stance. So I think also to take the courage and be a promoter of democracy. Then it's the other thing about, getting in touch with other communities, getting out of the university. Some countries are already good at doing so, but like the Netherlands or in the US, you have, for example, the town hall meetings or community gatherings where you could bring in your ideas. But in general, we had the feeling there's a lack of, where can you turn to? So some people attended yesterday's going out of the hotel and seeing an activist organization, and were very appreciative of this, and where it says, well, academics should get more involved with activists. But then we also came back to the point of, being idealistic about something, and then the realities. We were a lot of early career scholars who were also under a lot of pressure to do our publication load, to do our teaching load. We're very much, it becomes very egocentric. You have to look after yourselves, and you're already at the limit. So we also kind of raised the question, what could institutions do to actually put this on their agenda and make it easy or facilitate that people who would generally have an interest to become active and not just be idealistic about it can do something. Okay.
Okay, so in reaction to question 3, we had quite a long discussion about the nature of activism and came to the conclusion that we're all activists. It just depends on what we choose to do with that potential to be activists. So, we have responsibilities. And, we do have certain privileges. I think as Scott and Patricia and Namruji and Emma have indicated, we do have choices about what we can research to some extent. We can think about the subjects that we investigate. So that, I think, is still a privilege that we have. We're under constraints, and I don't think we can. We must be mindful of the pressures that particularly young scholars face to get published work out there. But we did think that, in addition to what others have said here already, that one other thing that we could do in addition to doing that research and getting that work out is to really think hard about a parallel track to that in terms of how do we communicate more effectively, whether it's with other activists. Patricia mentioned the getting out of the hotel session, which I think a lot of people found a lot of value in, and the feedback that came from that, it was that sometimes we don't really understand what you're saying as academics. And so I think there's 2 reactions to that. One is to say, well, that's not really what we do. But I think if we really want to be activists, I think it should be what we do, to take the research that we do and communicate it in a way that helps other people use that research and actually do something with it, whether it's in shorter statements, whether it's through Twitter, whether it's through taking a paper that we might write but doing another version that actually is something that the subjects that we study could relate to. I think it is incumbent upon us to work with other activists, and if we're going to do that, sometimes I think we need to work harder to translate the research that we do so that it helps us and helps other people take meaningful action. But thanks.
So on this third question, we sought to take a leaf out of what CMS had done when this travel ban had taken effect, in terms of member consultation and putting together a whole host of voices and views, and liaising with the academy and trying to get the academy to rework and so on and so forth. So, and that is primarily because we believe that it's not just we as scholars, but the academy as an institution is also a huge influencer, and it should be encouraged to proactively use this influence, and that can be supplemented by an ongoing kind of engagement with membership on views, soliciting views through different kinds of surveys, because we know the average gestation period of an idea, by the time it comes into a paper and then it gets into a citation circulation, I think the issue might be too late. We might be too late. So, given those kinds of concerns, we thought that there should be a process of proactively generating data about concerns and voicing them in whatever appropriate ways, including voicing it to the relevant administrations where necessary. So that's one thing. The second thing we thought involves creating more space for subjectivity-informed research. So letting that more, whether it's in terms of publication outlets or whatever, that there be more and more space for it, and not simply be seen as, okay, quantitative approaches or qualitative approaches, but space for more politically informed, or where the positions are clear and known and debates can further. And a third thing associated with this is, how do we create some of these? It's also about democratizing the academy's journal editorialships, because different voices and different politics can inform the research pipeline process. And more importantly, being more and more aware of the Eurocentricity of many of our discourses and institutions, including the institutions of governance and data generation. So, these are the things.
Wow. Thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid we rather underestimated how long all this would take. So we had a number of other things planned to do, which clearly they're going to kick us out in a couple of minutes, so we can't do that. It might be worth saying that, Hamid sent us a video that's about 7 minutes long. He's actually doing some work with border guards, something like
UK
that.
Border
UK Border Agency, thank you. So he has a particular interest in this issue. But we might be able to show you this later on at the business meeting. So we're almost done, but before I forget, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you for contributing in such rich ways. And just a slight apology from our point of view that we didn't have more time, really. And then, Paul, you want to...
It's just about the business meeting. We look forward to seeing everybody there. So once we've gotten through, I guess, the business, we then will be engaging with an activist thinking. So we'll continue the conversation. And it'll be more in terms of what in practice can we do in relation to activism. And then also a reminder about the keynote speaker, Anne Cunliffe, and her topic is CMS, a Scholarship of Possibilities, Humanifying Ourselves. So that'll be on Monday. And following that session then will be the main program, Social. So once again, thank you very much, and thank you also to our rapporteurs and our facilitators. Sorry.
Is there a way that some of this can be captured?
That's what we're doing. Also, sorry to say that. We're capturing all of this, and then we will look to then send it out to everybody.
Yeah, sorry, I should
So thank you very much for that. And that's
all
why it's great that it's actually being recorded. We weren't expecting this, but hey, it's great that we've captured this through the video. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.